All right, hello again. We're getting ready to jump into section 2 of Unit 2. We're going to talk about conditional statements. And when I'm recording this, it's Friday. We got the big Silver Creek football game tonight, and I've got my white on for the whiteout. I won't be at the game, but limited seating with this COVID stuff. But I'll be representing with my whiteout going on. So hopefully while you're watching this, Charlestown has already slayed the Dragons, but hopefully they did. All right, here we go. So, today we're working in this section where there's a lot of writing going on. I have guided notes. They say 2-2 conditional statements at the top. I've put this in Google Classroom with the video. And so if you want to print these out and have them to help save you on writing time, you can. If you don't have access to a printer, you're just going to probably have to pause a lot, because I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of writing in today's lesson. So let's just jump right in and knock it out. Those of you all at home, like I said, you'll have this and you'll basically got a skeletal outline of today's lesson in your hand, and we'll jump right in. All right, so conditional statements. A statement, and again, this is my abbreviation for statement, STMNT, a statement that can be written in if-then form. So there's two things going on. If this happens, then this is going to happen, all right? And I know your parents know all about this, if they've ever had to call some customer service on the phone, they've gotten this message before. If you would like to speak to a customer service representative, press 0 now. They've encountered that. A lot of times when you call places anymore, they don't have actual human beings answering the phone initially. They have some kind of robot message. This could be written as an if-then statement, meaning if you would like to speak to a customer service representative, comma, then press 0 now. So if you want this to happen, then you need to do this. That's your basic conditional statement. It's another name for it is an if-then statement. Back in the olden days when computers were just really getting going in school, I took a class and we used Fortran. We would use a lot of if-then statements. If blah, 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 then this is going to happen. But we use it in logic as well. Okay. On your guided notes here, you're going to see some of these things. This screen, these two vocab words are super important. The rest of the stuff is some different notation that we'll use throughout this unit. An if-then statement can be written literally as if P, and P would be one thing that's, it could happen, comma, then Q is going to happen. So these are P and Q are these two events or things that you want to happen or did happen. Writing it out in symbols over here, I got a spot for that. You could write P with an arrow to Q. That literally means if P happens, then Q is going to happen. All right. So the hypothesis, not to be confused with hypotenuse. Hypothesis is the phrase immediately following the word if. All right. So that would be in this situation. It would be the P. All right. The hypothesis is the P. It's the stuff that immediately follows it. All right. And in the olden days before COVID, I would, instead of having everybody write out the hypothesis, I would have them underline it once, and that would save us on some writing time. But now you're just going to have to literally type it in or write it into your notes, however you are doing that. And then the second part, the conclusion, you notice how it's underlined twice. I would have my students underline it twice rather than write it all out. Unfortunately, that's probably not going to be an option this year on the homework at least. And the conclusion, most people are familiar with the conclusion. That's what happens at the end, or that's what we want to happen if this other thing happens. So the conclusion is the stuff immediately following the word then or an implied then. sometimes people don't talk like a robot. They don't say if blah blah blah, then blah blah blah. They don't speak like that. They just speak more normally, and they don't always say the then every time. There's an implied then. But the conclusion is represented by the letter Q. All right. So just here's a little Venn diagram representation of what's going on. Basically, if P happens, and you see P is totally encapsulated. Ooh, that's a good SAT word, encapsulated. The P bubble is totally encapsulated inside the Q bubble. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try to make it pop. This is a Q right here. So if P happens, obviously Q, it's inside of the Q. So if P, then Q is going to happen. All right. So that's, again, this stuff is not too important, but the main thing is this. The hypothesis is the phrase immediately following the word if. Now, please don't think that the word if is part of the hypothesis. It's not. It's like the sign saying, hey, get ready, here comes the hypothesis. I'm not part of the hypothesis. I'm just letting you know it's about to happen. All right. So on the test, one of the answer choices will have the word if in there as part of the hypothesis. Don't pick that one. Don't pick that one, because if is just letting you know, hey, here comes the hypothesis. I'm not it. It's the stuff after me. Same thing with the conclusion. The conclusion is the stuff that comes after the then, or an implied then. Like you can almost hear the then in the phrase that the person says. They don't usually say it sometimes, but you can hear where it should be. All right, moving on. If you have any questions, of course, let me know. So we're moving on. I'm right here in the guided notes. Identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. And again, to save time, I have them underline the hypothesis once and the conclusion twice. So the first one is pretty easy. If the forecast is rain, comma, then I will take an umbrella. So I asked my students, hey, what's the hypothesis in this? And invariably somebody didn't pay attention to me at the beginning, and they would read off, if the forecast is rain. No, it's the part after the word, the if. So the hypothesis in this one would be the forecast is rain. All right? This word if is just saying, get ready, here comes the hypothesis, boom, there it is. And then underline the conclusion twice, then I will take an umbrella. So this is what's going to happen if the forecast is rain. If the forecast is rain, something's going to happen, and the thing that's going to happen is I will take an umbrella. All right? Pretty easy stuff so far, right? And some of y'all at this point, I always have students say, hey, where's the math, Mr. Metcalfe? This seems like English class. And it's going to. This unit is going to seem a lot like writing and whatnot, and not so much what we consider math, but it is math. It's logic, actually. Okay. Now, and again, once again, we don't always speak like robots, and we don't always say the beginning first and the conclusion second. Sometimes for emphasis, like, if we want to really emphasize what's going to happen first, if this other thing happens, we sometimes actually say the conclusion first and the hypothesis second. Like in the example of me yelling at my kids sometimes, somebody's going to get in trouble if that room doesn't get cleaned, right? See, I'm wanting to emphasize the point that there's going to be some trouble if the room doesn't get cleaned. The room getting cleaned is the first part, right? So that's what's going on here. A number is divisible by 10 if its last digit is a 0. So what you're saying, Mr. Metcalfe, is the conclusion can come first and the hypothesis second? Absolutely. Sometimes for emphasis, they'll do that. So on this one, the hypothesis is actually second, because here's the word if. So the hypothesis is its last digit is a 0. So if something's last digit is a 0, then the word then isn't even in this problem, but you can almost hear it. If its last digit is a 0, then a number is divisible by 10. You can almost feel it or hear it, but this would be the conclusion, even though it's in the front. And once again, notice how the word if did not get underlined at all. The word if will not and the word then will not get underlined. Please don't think they're the part of it. They're the warning sign that says, hey, here comes the hypothesis, or hey, here comes the conclusion. All right. And here's another one. Another performance will be scheduled if the first one is sold out. So what's the thing that has to happen first? The first one has to get sold out, and if that happens, so here's if the first one is sold out, that's the if, the hypothesis, then another performance will be scheduled. So that would be the conclusion, even though it comes first. So apparently, you have some people who are worried about, are they going to have another performance? And the person is saying, another performance will be scheduled if the first one sells out. So sometimes, just for emphasis on things, they will say the conclusion first and the hypothesis second. All right? Any questions on those? Pretty straightforward. We're cruising right along. Okay. Many conditional statements are written or spoken without the words if and then. You don't have to have them. Like, look at this one. This was classic. Somebody told me there's a restaurant here in Charlestown that still has one of these signs up. I haven't seen one of these in years, but they were all over the place when I was your all's age. McDonald's had them. Basically, the sign said, no shoes, no shirt, no service. All right, so the word if or then, neither one is in this phrase, but you could turn it into a conditional statement by adding the if and the then. And how might you do that? So what's going on? Well, the conclusion is, if you don't meet these requirements here, you're going to get no service. So the then part is pretty easy. Then, no service. That's the conclusion. If you don't follow these rules, so if you aren't wearing shoes, and sometimes you have to make it flow, to make the conditional flow and have correct grammar and stuff, you have to add some words. As long as you don't change the meaning, that's okay. So if you are not wearing shoes, if you are not wearing shoes or a shirt, comma, then you're going to get no service at that establishment, as my dad used to always say, establishment, like that. Okay, so does that make sense? So there's no if and there's no then, but you can see pretty much where they go. Here's the requirements. If you have no shoes and no shirt on, then you're not going to get any service. All right, moving right along. And again, hopefully you're following at home. We just wiped out that first page. I think we're on the back of the first slice now. Try to open mine. I don't want to waste y'all's time doing that, but yeah, there it is. No shoes, no shirts. And then we got, okay. Apparently I've skipped one here. Yep. There's another one on here underneath the no shoes, no shirt, no service, where it says, points will be deducted from any paper turned in after Wednesday's deadline. So again, the if and the then are totally absent, but we can change it into a conditional statement by adding them and doing it in the correct order. So what's going on here, and those of you, hopefully you're following along at home, it says points will be deducted from any paper turned in after Wednesday's deadline. So again, they basically tell you the conclusion first, because the professor or whoever said this is trying to emphasize you're going to lose points if it's turned in after Wednesday's deadline, right? So sometimes that happens a lot. They want you to know it's really important. This is the thing that's going to happen if you don't do what I want you to do or whatever. So on this one, I would say if it's turned in after Wednesday's deadline, if it is turned in after Wednesday's deadline, not Deadpool, deadline, then points will be deducted. And let's take taking me a lot of time writing this. On your paper. Points will be deducted on your paper. And now I've written it as a more standard if-then conditional. All right, and that was in your guided notes. So yeah. I didn't even need to do that. They just wanted me to indicate the hypothesis and the conclusion. Wow, I did what we call in the hood extra. All right, so they really want which one was which. So the hypothesis would be this if it is turned in after Wednesday's deadline, and then the conclusion would be points will be deducted on your paper or from your paper. Either one of those. Okay, that takes care of that. And then we got some chances for you to write a conditional, an if-then form, and then indicate what's the hypothesis and the conclusion. Let's see if I got that loaded up here. No, I jumped down to truth value. Where's truth value? Okay, it's not really on here yet. So let's kind of ignore this for a second. They got you a couple examples for you to write an if-then statement from something that somebody apparently said. Like in the first one it says, 4 quarters can be exchanged for a $1 bill. That makes sense. 4 quarters can be exchanged for a $1 bill. So turning that into an if-then statement might look something like this. Let's see if I can insert page before the current page. Okay. So what I would do, and again, it says 4 quarters can be exchanged. Not sure why I don't have this screen loaded. For a $1 bill. For a $1 bill. Everybody pretty much agrees with that, right? So again, you got to say, what's going on here? I kind of need to have the $1 bill first before I can exchange it for 4 quarters. So even though the $1 bill comes last, this is another classic one where the if or the hypothesis is at the end and the conclusion's at the beginning. So what I would do, they want us to indicate the hypothesis and the conclusion. I'm going to write it as an if-then first. I'm going to say, if you have a $1 bill, if you have a $1 bill, comma, then something can happen. All right? Then it can be exchanged for 4 quarters. It can be exchanged for 4 quarters. And they wanted us to indicate which one's which. So how about the hypothesis? Not going to underline the word if. The hypothesis would be if you have a $1 bill, then the conclusion is it can be exchanged for 4 quarters. So I should have put a period on the end of that. All right. Is that making sense to everybody? Then there's another one about the sum of the measures of 2 supplementary angles. So in that one, you would probably say something to the effect, this one you have to kind of jumble around a little bit if I remember correctly. The sum of the measures of 2 supplementary angles is 180. So if, I would say it's something like this. If the sum of 2 angles is 180, then they are supplementary angles. Does that make sense? So if you need to pause it and write that down. The initial phrase was the sum of the measures of 2 supplementary angles is 180. So I switched that to if the sum of 2 angles is 180, then you have supplementary angles. All right? Pause if you need to write that down in your notes. And then we talk about truth value. Truth value of a conditional statement. That's literally whether it's true or false. So just because somebody writes a fancy if-then statement, it doesn't mean it's true. So sometimes it's when I ask you for its truth value or its TV, I'm gonna call it the TV because that's writing too much. If I ask you for the TV, all I'm asking is the statement true or is it false? It looks like I have some examples right here. Nope, actually I want to talk, before I do one of those, I want to talk about the negation. All right? Negation is when you negate or you say the opposite of what you said. Like, here's a perfect example. Hopefully I'm not using the one in the thing. Something about, I'm going to go to the store after dinner. Well, the negation of that would simply be, I am not going to go to the store after dinner. All right? All I did is basically add the word not. And that's what it says. When you not something, or we use a squiggle, and again, there's that squiggle again, popped up again. We had this a while back, and I asked you for it. Nobody sent me an email telling me what the official name was called yet, I don't believe. So this means not P if there's a squiggle in front of it. All right? A statement is given the opposite meaning, usually by adding the word not. Like, I could say, the sky is blue. That would be a statement. The negation of that statement would be, or the squiggle would be, the sky is not blue. So whenever you put a negation, it literally changes the meaning to the opposite. All right? That's important to know. A negation makes the statement have the opposite meaning. And that puts me right here. Uh-oh. Now we're going to get into the really juicy stuff here. Okay. This is something we skipped. There's something about Tom doing his homework. Oh my goodness, two of them clicked by. Okay. Now, here's some different other types of conditionals that become important. We got the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. The converse, and I got a spot for those definitions right here, right down here at the bottom. The converse is when the hypothesis and conclusion are switched. So in the beginning, if you remember that first one, I said something about if you want to speak to a customer service representative, then press 0. The converse of that would be if you press 0, then you can speak to a customer service representative. So all I did is I switched the hypothesis and the conclusion. All right. I still say the if part first and the then part second. I literally switched the phrases around, leaving the if there and leaving the then where it is. All right. The inverse of something. Inverse, again, kind of means the opposite, or also the word inverted. One of my favorite scenes in the movie Top Gun is Tom Cruise. He's flying along with that Russian MiG fighter, and he is inverted. He's upside down, and he's on, flying on top of him like a maverick that he is. When you negate it or when you not it, you turn it upside down. You give it the opposite meaning. All right. So when you negate the hypothesis and the conclusion, all right, so you're going to not both of them. So if you go back to my original example of if you'd like to speak to a customer representative, then press 0. The inverse of that would be if you do not want to talk to a customer service representative, then do not press 0. All right? I put a not in the hypothesis and I put a not in the conclusion. All right? Now, things get really tricky when we talk about this guy, the contrapositive. The contrapositive is when you do the converse and the inverse at the same time. So you negate and switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. You're doing them both. And man, let's see if I can freestyle that one. Y'all probably think I got a teleprompter up here because I'm so smooth with this, but I don't. So if I go back to that original one, remember our original statement on the very front page said something about if you want to talk to a customer service representative, then press 0. The contrapositive is I'm going to switch them and negate them at the same time. So the contrapositive of that would be if you do not press 0, then you will not speak to a customer service representative. See, I added nots to both of them and I switched the order. That's the contrapositive. So take a few seconds and jot that down. We'll move on. I think we're probably going to do an example, kind of like what I just did, but with something else. But real quick, some of these guys are what's called logically equivalent. So meaning they're going to have the same truth value. Either, these two, certain ones are always going to be, if one's true, the other one's going to be true, and if one's false, the other one's going to be false. And here's the breakdown of that. Logically equivalent, just like statements with the same truth value. So if I say something's logically equivalent, that means they're either both true or they're both false. And some books call that equivalent statements. All right. The converse and the inverse will always have the same truth value. So if the converse of something is true, then so is its inverse. And same thing with the opposite. Like if the converse is false, then the inverse is false. Then the conditional or the original statement and the contrapositive should always have the same truth value. All right. So these two guys will always have the same truth value, and these two guys will always have the same truth value. And that's helpful to know. So then we got, oh man, we're coming down the home stretch, guys. We're almost done here. So we're going to talk about lions for a second. I fixed this one for us so we'd all be on the same wavelength. This is at the top of your notes. It says lions are cats that can roar. Now there's a couple of ways to break that into a conditional statement. So I just went ahead and did it kind of for us so we'd all be talking about the same statement. So the conditional, I've changed it to if it is a lion. So if it's a lion, comma, then it is a cat that can roar. And over the years, people have broken this down in different ways, so I just did it for us, the conditional, just so we're all on the same page. All right, so the converse of that. Now remember, converse is when you take the hypothesis, which is the if part, and the conclusion, which is the then part, and just simply switch them. All right, so if my original is, if it is a lion, then it is a cat that can roar. The converse would be, let's put this in a red color. Let's go Charlestown blue for the big game tonight. So if, not this stuff, it is a cat that can roar, comma, then it is a lion. Bam. All right. Now, don't get heavy into that. Well, that's not true. I've read a book about lions. And no, I'm not saying this is true yet. I'm just telling you what the converse is, okay? I haven't assigned a truth value to it. Okay, the inverse. Now, remember the inverse, that's when we're inverted, we're upside, we got the opposite meaning. So that's the one where you don't change the order any, you simply add the word not into the hypothesis and the conclusion. So this one would be if it is not a lion. If it is not a lion, comma, then it is not a cat that can roar. Then it is not a cat that can roar. Y'all feeling the flavor of this? So I got my double knot. I call it a double knot. You got a knot in the front. You got a knot in the back. And now, here's the hardest one. Is putting it all together on the contrapositive. You're doing the converse and the inverse at the same time of the original. I keep going back to the original. Don't contrapositive the inverse or the converse. Always go back to the original. So the contrapositive, switching the order and double knotting it at the same time. So the contrapositive would be if it is not a cat that can roar, it is not a cat that can roar, comma, then it is not a lion. Then it is not a lion. Awesome. Man, then here's a little fun fact I put down at the bottom. I remember the first time I did this lesson probably 12 years ago, something like that. A little fun fact about being able to roar and being a cat. Leopards, jaguars, lions, and tigers are in the Panthera genus. Y'all learn about genus, all that stuff in biology class. They're in the Panthera genus. They are the only cats that can roar. However, here's the interesting fact. They cannot purr. So your little cat you have sitting on your couch, sometimes it purrs if you pet it just the right way that they like. It'll purr. Well, that little cat you have can't roar, can't do the roar thing like a Simba on Lion King or whatever. But the flip side of that is lions can't purr. They can't do that little purr sound some people like. Okay, I think that's going to take us to our last screen maybe. Or maybe we are done. Oh, here's a little chance for you to get some practice. Here's a conditional. If two angles have the same measure, then they are congruent. Why don't you take a little time and do the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. And I'll pause here. You'll write those out. Welcome back, man. I hope you did make the effort to do the converse, inverse, and contrapositive to this statement. I'm going to go ahead and process what you should have done or something close. I mean, if you have the same meaning, you're okay. Let's take a look. So I went ahead and I converted, made the conditional for you. I put it in the specific if-then form. I don't know if the original one was like that. No, two angles that have the same measure are congruent. So I just went ahead and neatened it up a little bit so we're all on the same page. So hopefully for the converse you did something like this. Now remember, the converse is literally when you switch the order. So you got if blah blah blah, then blah blah blah. The converse is you just switch those two. All right. So this one would be, and still I'm going to write if first, because you still say it, the if, then the then, you just switch the phrases. So if they are congruent, comma, then two angles have the same measure. Then two angles have the same measure. Now again, you may have changed up the wording a little bit. You might have put if two angles are congruent, then they have the same measure. You might have moved the they and then the two angles part just to make it flow better, and that's okay as long as you're not changing the meaning. All right, so inverse, and again, like I said on the previous screen, we're not doing the inverse of this. We're doing the inverse of the original conditional statement. And remember, that's the one where I call it double knot it. You put a knot in the front, knot in the back, and changes it up. Okay, so if two angles do not have the same measure, all right, if two angles do not have the same measure, comma, then they are not congruent. And they are not congruent. Bam. All right. And last one, if you can do the contrapositive, you've got this down, because that's the hardest one there is, because you're doing both of these at the same time. So let's see if you did something close to what I did. If they are not congruent, comma, then two angles do not have the same measure. Then two angles do not have the same measure. Awesome. Oops. Any questions, man? I hope I explained that pretty well. Probably spent a little longer than I needed to emphasize it, but I try to do that for you guys who are at home. You don't have a lot of opportunities to ask as many questions. I'm noticing at the bottom of the guided notes, now you come up with your own conditional statement. So you can make up one of your own, have fun with it. And then, if you want to take your conditional statement and go ahead and do the converse, inverse, and contrapositive, man, it's extra practice. Or if not, you can jump right in and do the lesson, man. So good luck. Good luck to the Pirates tonight against Silver Creek, and I'll see you next time.